I thought that they would be more sensible. I really didn't think that they would be as incompetent and handle it as poorly as they have. I thought that having lost this referendum, they would at least work with the EU to try and rescue what we could from it, and head for a softer landing than we have.
But so Chris, it's a pleasure to have you on my show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I came across Cakeism as a podcast and a concept. Must have been just 3 or 4 months ago, and it really jumped out at me as like just a fantastic name for a podcast just about Brexit. Just straight up, I chuckled a little bit. But like, why don't you explain exactly what you mean by Cakeism? Well,
so my background is that I'm an EU official. I work for the EU. I have done for well over 20 years now, actually, 25 years. Gosh, wow. And I was always really passionate about the EU. Back in the 80s, it was the thing that radicalized me under Thatcher. More than anything else, really, was when she started becoming highly critical of the EU. That was what really kind of mobilized me against her. So I wanted to go and work for the EU, which I successfully managed to do. And having dedicated my entire career to this thing, which I genuinely believe in, I mean, I would call it a vocation rather than a career. To see what was then happening in the UK was depressing, to put it mildly. And as things progressed and went from bad to worse with the referendum, I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. I was sort of rubbernecking it the whole way. And I got increasingly frustrated by the tendency in British discussion to focus solely on what was going on in the UK, and even more specifically on what was going on in Westminster, and really ignoring entirely the elephant in the room, which is the EU and the 27 member states. And I felt that there was a need to bring this perspective into the UK discussion. So I thought, well, you know what? Why don't we do our own podcast? Why don't I do a podcast? And I was like, who can help me out here? My pal Steve had both a recording studio and an enormous Twitter following, so he was the obvious candidate for me to rope into it, which I proceeded to do. And we launched into this podcast with the idea of really just bringing a Brussels perspective to it. And from the angle of injecting some reality into this discussion from the UK angle. It wasn't just on the Leave side that people were being, I thought, hopelessly unrealistic and delusional about what the UK could expect to do, and what it was also on the other side, on the Remain side, people would be like, well, we'll just cancel it, it'll be fine, or we just need to do a bit of reform of the EU and everything will be fine. And it got me extremely cross. So cakeism, if you like, is the shorthand for this delusional exceptionalist mentality that has always existed and still exists on the UK side. So that's kind of what we wanted to capture it in. I can't remember how we actually came up with the term. I think it was because there was so much having your cake and eating it going on at the time. One of the most notorious phrases back from 2016, 2017 was Boris Johnson saying, I'm pro having your cake and pro eating it. I think it was, my policy is pro having cake and pro eating cake. And, just the arrogant, glib, flippant way of saying, yeah, I'm a cakeist, so what? Yeah, I believe in it. Yeah, that's what, of course it's perfect. When the entire point of the proverb of the saying is, this is not realistic. It's not possible. You can't do these two mutually incompatible things. So then, I don't know, Cakewatch was the name of the podcast, and the logo that we came up with is really just a riff on the old Crime Watch logo from the BBC.
Right.
And the idea being that we would be policing this crap. We would on a weekly basis, we would look at this crap and call it out. I mean, in reality, what's happened is, it hasn't been quite so specific and organised as that. We've generally talked about the Brexit themes of the day, and since the COVID lockdown, we've more or less gone on hiatus with a couple of exceptions. Yeah, that's the general philosophy that we've pursued, is just calling out these fantastical delusions on the UK side and pointing out from a Brussels perspective why these are so unrealistic.
I mean, there was definitely a lot of just fantastical dreaming and thinking from everyone during the campaign. There was very few people attempting to have like a rational, like nuanced debate about it. It was either the EU is like the EU SSR, or it's like this magical, wonderful thing that has no flaws whatsoever.
I mean, it's not even that. It's that we can fix all the flaws, and we can come back in and we can be leaders of this, and we can sort it all out. Or they'll be longing to have us back as long as we just reverse our opinions. Or we can just join up with the Norwegians and we'll be in the EEA, and it'll be fine, because the EEA, firstly, is effectively being like an EU member. You get to have a say over all the legislation, which is completely untrue. You don't. And secondly, the idea that the Norwegians would just be happy to have this large and awkward partner suddenly is rolling up and taking over this organisation. So on all sorts of levels. And you see, even this past week, I've seen it. Even this past week, you've had this absurd, to me, utterly absurd rumour that Biden's going to appoint Obama as the US ambassador to the UK as some kind of punishment to Johnson, which is a ridiculous idea. And then having pointed out this ridiculous idea, you suddenly get this whole host of Remainers coming in and saying, oh yeah, but that'd be awesome, wouldn't it? Oh, wouldn't that be great? Oh, that'd be really good. Well, I know it wouldn't. Firstly, it's ridiculous. Of course they're not going to do that. And secondly, what kind of message would that be sending to the role of the UK in the world and how important everybody's... I mean, again, utterly exceptionalist, utterly delusional. This totally unrealistic idea of the UK's role in the world. Now, John Major made a terrific speech this past week where he called this out. He said, listen, this is who we are now. We just need to get used to it. We need to live with that. There's nothing to be ashamed about. It's perfectly, it's a perfectly cromulent thing to be a sort of a big second-rate power, but be realistic about it and be realistic about our goals and our capacities and our reach. And having been more realistic about it, that then gives us a pathway to doing what's important, which is looking after our quality of life, looking after our values, doing what countries of our size normally do very well. And we look around at our neighbours and we see them doing it very well. And we're not doing it very well. And this is what drives me, is the idea that if we could only come to terms with the reality, we might actually have a pretty good stab at having a pretty good life as UK citizens. So,
yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Has your opinion changed on Brexit at all? You kind of hinting there that you've kind of accepted that this is where we're going. This is probably what's going to happen. And as soon as we face up to the reality of what our situation is going to be, that we're going to be able to move forward and figure out what sort of country we want to be post Brexit. Have you changed your thoughts on the idea of leaving the EU generally?
No, I mean, my notion of whether Brexit's a good thing or not. Now, I should just preface that by saying that, in a way, I wear two hats, because I'm both British, born in the UK and resident in the UK. I happen also to be a dual national. I'm a German citizen too, but I mostly identify as British, having grown up here. And European, and my European identity is extremely important to me. As I've mentioned, it's defined my career. So that being so, where was I going with this? No, I've always thought that Brexit was an absolutely terrible idea, and I still think that. And I have not had a moment's doubt on that at all. Except insofar as with my EU hat on, I've thought maybe for the EU it wouldn't be such a bad thing. Sometimes I've thought, it's not a bad thing for the EU, for the UK to take this sort of journey into the wilderness. So that's the kind of double-hatted bit of it. But as a Brit, as somebody who's British and who wants the best for this country, no, I've never had the moment's doubt that it's a terrible, terrible thing. The only thing that's changed is my assessment of where the UK government would take this. I thought that they would be more sensible. I really didn't think that they would be as incompetent and handle it as poorly as they have. I thought that having lost this referendum, they would at least work with the EU to try and rescue what we could from it, and head for a softer landing than we have. On that, I've been constantly disappointed, and so that there's that. Then there's acceptance of the fact that we are going to Brexit. Now, I fought that at every step of the way. I always thought it was likely that we would end up leaving, but there was a chance that we could stop it, and as long as there was a chance, we should try and do that. That chance disappeared after the general election last year, when Boris Johnson won his election. After that, it was obvious that it wasn't going to happen. We were going to leave. That changes things in certain key ways. It means that the focus has to shift from trying to reverse the outcome of the referendum, to making the best of what happens afterwards. Now, on that, my view is that we're going to be out for a long time. That is going to take a long time for us to build back to a platform for rejoining. And that's where we need to be. It needs to be a long-term campaign, and that campaign has to be a broad campaign. So on one extreme, you're going to have people who are shouting for rejoining, and I intend to be one of those people. And there are going to be other people who are saying, incrementally, let's just do what we can to be pragmatic and realistic and realign ourselves with the EU. And but collectively, we're going to get to a point. My view is we are going to get to a point in 5 to 10 years' time where we are far more aligned with the EU than it currently looks as if we're going to be. And that then provides a platform for ramping up rejoin efforts. And I think we're looking sort of 10, 15, 20 years down the line for that. But that's where we are. I mean, that's a fight for other people now, I think. I mean, by that point, I'll be retired, and But yeah, I have not wavered one millimeter from my absolute conviction that Brexit is an absolute shit idea.
I mean, what would you make of the people who say, because this is an opinion I'm very, very sort of slowly drifting towards, and one that up until, as you mentioned, actually, up until Boris had won the election in 2019, I was still of the opinion that we could get a referendum. I honestly thought that there was a reasonable chance of Corbyn getting in with some sort of coalition, and we'd have a referendum, and then that would really settle the question. And I'm not sure whether people would have gone Remain if we'd had the chance to vote again, because I really am not quite sure. I think we might have leaned Remain, but I'm not sure it would have settled the question if we'd had a second debate. But since then, maybe this is just like my brain trying to be optimistic of the situation, but I've been reading some critiques of Europe, and at the minute it looks, to some people at least, like leaving Europe may not be the worst idea as it becomes sort of more unstable and difficult to govern. Like one of the critiques I really buy actually is that it's become too big, and it's especially with the euro, it's incredibly difficult to govern or make fiscal policy for that big a group of nations. And I'm curious as to whether you think that in 10 years that the EU will still be in the same position in terms of like global power, in terms of economic stability, in terms of their just the state of the European Union generally, and whether at that point it'll still be worth rejoining for us, or at least worth like asking the question.
Well, look, this has been a recurrent theme in UK politics, primarily on the Leave side, but not just on the Leave side. This has been a recurrent theme all the way through, which is that the EU is doomed. It's going to fall apart. The euro is going to collapse. It's too big to manage. And at every point, the EU has shown that to be false. I mean, the EU, if anything, Brexit has revived a lot of people's passion for European integration and a lot of people's faith in it as a concept. Now, so I want to divorce the two sides. There's a discussion to be had about the EU. I want to keep that entirely separate from the discussion about Brexit. Now, the idea that the UK will be better off outside while the EU reforms itself and sorts itself out, I think, is a good idea for the EU, because the EU could do without the baneful influence and the baleful influence of the UK during this process. If it's a terrible idea for the UK, because the UK will then simply be, well, for all the reasons that we know, but it'll be a terrible thing for the UK to be outside the EU. Point final, full stop. It's going to suffer economically, and we're going to go through a very bitter and difficult period in terms of our own political life during this period. It's going to be a very difficult period, I think, for the UK. For the EU, now I've got a lot of opinions on this, and in a way, Brexit has provided me with a break from thinking about all these things. It's been a distraction. I happen to be somebody that believes passionately that the EU needs reform. That doesn't mean I think that it's terminally broken, but I do think that that there are very serious things that need to happen for the EU to realise its potential. In the UK discussion, and not only in the UK, but in the UK discussion, when we talk about reform, the EU, generally we're talking about rolling back the powers of the EU. Mm-hmm. We're talking about making it more intergovernmental as opposed to giving it sort of the quasi status of a state. That's not the kind of reform that I mean at all. In my view, which I've documented a number of times in my blog, and I've also discussed it on the podcast a few times. In my view, the problem, the number one problem that the EU has is that there is imbalance between its institutions. The European Council and the Council of the European Union, not the same thing, but increasingly the same thing, have far too much power. In terms of the interinstitutional dynamics of the European Union. And that gravely hampers our capacity to act and to do what needs to be done. So the kind of reform that I'm talking about, and this then ties into the whole issue of subsidiarity and federalism that I think we're going to discuss. The kind of reform that the EU desperately needs is to weaken the grip of the council and to enhance the role of the executive, which is to say the commission, and the democratic accountability of that commission, not to member state governments, but to the people of the EU. So you do that through the parliament, you do that by reforming the council. Without going into technical details here, that's basically where I'm coming from. So I am an unabashed and unashamed out there federalist, EU federalist. I believe in a European tier of government. Doesn't mean I believe in a European superstate. It doesn't mean I believe that the member states should all be dissolved or denigrated or reduced to tick boxes. I don't think that at all, and that's a misrepresentation of what federalism means and what European integration means. I strongly believe in European diversity and in the power of European citizens. What I don't like is the power of EU nation states and member states and national capitals, and I think that that's dangerous to the entire project. And I think we see that in a number of ways. We see that, for example, in the way that outrider governments like Orban and Poland can block progress in certain policy areas. I see it on a daily basis in the area that I work, which is foreign policy. So I work in the EU's foreign policy branch, and that's still intergovernmental for the most part, which means that we can't proceed, we can't we can't do anything without unanimity of all our member states. So for me, the things started to go wrong with the Maastricht Treaty, which created these three pillars. It created an intergovernmental pillar, and it got worse with the treaties of Nice and Amsterdam, which paved the way for the enlargement, the big enlargement, but didn't do the necessary institutional reform to allow that to be successful. And where we are now is with this sort of mammoth EU with now 27 member states, but with institutions that were established for 6 and that haven't been reformed to match our expansion. So in the parlance of the 80s and 90s, I was always a deepener, not a widener. I strongly believed that we should deepen before we widened. But what we did was we widened and then we didn't deepen. And having widened, it becomes very difficult to deepen. So I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily particularly optimistic for the path of, I'm not saying that my vision is something that I believe is going to come to pass, but I think it's something that needs to come to pass. If we don't get it, it doesn't mean that the EU is just simply going to collapse in upon itself. It just means that we're going to be what we are now. And that is still pretty important. It's an economic superpower, but it's not something that is capable of leveraging its economic superpower status into meaningful impact on the global stage in non-economic scenarios. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know where we will be in 10, 20 years' time, but I don't necessarily we're going to think we're going to be where I want us to be. At the same time, I don't for a second believe these visions, these nightmare visions of collapse, of creeping incapacity. I think that's wishful thinking on the part of a lot of people who regret their decision to leave or want to justify their decision to leave. I don't buy it. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, that's all right. I mean, this is what podcasts are for. You can give as long an answer as you want to. But, yeah. So you segued quite nicely there into the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is the ideas of subsidiarity and federalism. So just for people who don't maybe quite grasp what federalism is before we start going into it, you can correct me if you feel this is a poor definition, but I think just looking at America is like an excellent example of just a way that federalism might work, in that they have their 50 states with a government in each state, and they have their national government that sets policy and laws, but then there's like certain laws that can be overridden by state governments, and there's certain ones that are set from the top down. And ultimately that also like ties quite nicely into the concept of subsidiarity, which is one that the EU was actually founded on. But I'm not 100% sure how much they actually adhere to it. Well, you can give your thoughts on that if you'd like. But subsidiarity, again, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, is essentially the idea that every decision should be taken at the most local level that it can be made. So they shouldn't be making policy about your local garden center at the EU level, essentially, or about the streets in your town or something like that. That decisions like that affect people on a really local level should be made at the local level, and then there should be some decisions made at a national level, and then some made at an EU level. So yeah, when we start with to what extent you think the EU have really adhered to subsidiarity?
Okay. So yeah, your definition of subsidiarity there is, I think, correct. My understanding is that, and I'm not a political historian, but my understanding is that it originated in Catholic canon law. And certainly it's a concept that seems to be more widely understood in for example, Germany. But yeah, it's the idea that the decisions should be taken at the level as close to the citizen as possible, or as reasonable. And as you say, planning, the calendar for waste collection, those sort of things, you take at a very local level. Foreign policy, trade policy, it makes sense to take these decisions at the highest level that there is, and so on in between. And that's the notion of subsidiarity, and it first it wasn't there right at the beginning of the EU, but as the EU became progressively, and I use the term EU interchangeably with the European communities, of course, as the EU became more politically integrated and as its ambition increased, so I think it became more important to flesh out these notions. And so I think it was the Single European Act in the 80s that first introduced the notion of subsidiarity into the treaties, but only in specific policy areas. And it was only with the Maastricht Treaty that you first had a general application of the principle of subsidiarity. And now you've got it right there in the treaty, in Article 5 of the treaty. In fact, if you give me a second, I'm just going to pull up my laptop and I can read you the bit of the treaty where it is.
Yeah.
So here we go. In Article 5, paragraph 3 of the treaty of the Lisbon, of the consolidated treaties after Lisbon, you've got under the principle of subsidiarity, in areas which do not fall within its exclusive competence, the Union shall act only if and insofar as the objectives of the proposed action cannot be sufficiently achieved by the member states, either at central level or at regional and local level. So what that's saying is that decisions should be taken at the level closest to the citizen, be that local or regional or central in member states, but it's the member states that should decide on that. And the way this works in practice is that national parliaments, under the Treaty of Lisbon, national parliaments are empowered to scrutinise EU legislation and flag if they think that the principle of subsidiarity has been breached. And that has happened. That's happened 3 times, I think, so far, where member states, a majority of member state parliaments have said, no, this breaches the principle of subsidiarity, so we don't think we should be proceeding. And the Commission's pulled back proposals, even where it doesn't agree. So it does, yeah, it is applied, it's in there, it's in law, and it works. It has been applied. My difficulty with it is that it leaves it to the member states to decide, national parliaments and member states to decide at what level subsidiarity should then be applied below the European tier. So that's not, and then we come to the notion of federalism. I mean, that's not what I understand by federalism. So federalism for me is about tiers of government. So federalism is, if you like, the expression of subsidiarity in politics. You have decisions that are taken by the appropriate tier of government, be that local, regional, national, or European. You mentioned the US, which of course is a federal republic, but I mean I can think of other examples that might actually be even better. So you've got, for example, Canada, which I know well because I was posted out there as a diplomat. But you've also got Belgium or Germany, and some other EU member states where federalism is very well established. I mean, in Belgium, you have you've had a number of recent reforms which have tweaked the federal state in a way that, if anybody that knew Belgium in the early 90s and in the 80s and the early 90s will tell you that there's just been an enormous change in the country in terms of its prosperity, in terms of its good functioning since the latest change to its federal structure. And if you like, the ultimate test of that is that Belgium, I think, has the record for the length of time that it's gone without having a national government. I mean, they've had national elections, and they've taken literally years to form a coalition government at the national level. And it hasn't led to the collapse of the Belgian state, precisely because the Belgians, in a way, in the Belgian situation, the national level is almost irrelevant, or redundant is the proper word there, because you've got this you've got these powers at federal and regional level that function extremely well in terms of delivering good governance, and then you've got the European tier of government and there's not much left in the middle for the national government to take care of, and national governments do not like that. And this is what I mean when we talk about the imbalance of the institutions with the council, which are national governments. You've got the council, where under the way that the treaty currently works, I mean, it would have to be the council that would decide to reform the EU in a more federal direction. And they're not going to do that because effectively they'd be signing their own death warrant. It's a bit like the UK. You're never going to get where the Westminster Parliament agreeing to move from first past the post to proportional representation or to a more devolved federal structure, because it would effectively take away their entire raison d'etre. So I mean, we can talk about that a bit more. But so, federalism for me is about setting in stone how decisions are taken, how subsidiarity works in a practical level, how rules are made at the local, regional, national, and European level. Draw breath. So there you go. That's my pitch.
So one thing I would like to know is that Guinness very unfairly did not give Northern Ireland the world record for the longest period without a government. We had about 1,000 days with no government, but they refused to say that we had the record. They wanted to keep it with Belgium. I'm not sure why. Perhaps that was Guinness themselves saying, the north of Ireland shouldn't have a record for anything that wasn't, shooting at each other. But so like one of the criticisms that was very prevalent in the EU debate over Brexit was that the EU was, I don't want to say fundamentally undemocratic, but that the idea that the power was so far from the place of so far from the voter in so many cases that people didn't vote for their EU member of European Parliament. They felt disconnected from this parliament that's across the sea, like miles away from where they're making from where we're placing the vote and where like real life for them is going on. And to me, it seems like there's a federalist EU would maybe even exacerbate those critiques or problems, because you would have a more solidified executive at a European level. But maybe what do you make of those criticisms?
I don't think you would. I don't think you would. I mean, the executive is the executive, and I mean, you have an executive at the EU level. It's a federal, a stronger federal structure would enhance the links between each of those levels and the citizen. And my personal view is that the problem that you have in the EU at the moment, the reason that people feel so distant from Brussels decision-making structures, is because you've got this intervening layer of national government that acts as a kind of firewall and a filter. And that needs to be broken down for me. And it is broken down in many EU states. In many EU states, you don't have those kind of barriers. So, as an EU civil servant, I see citizens. I see, my number's in the phone book. You can look me up. That's not true for Whitehall civil servants. Citizens can write to commissioners because citizens write to their MEPs. MEPs come and see us. I mean, there is direct interaction between the institutions and the citizens. That's generally not been true with British citizens for some reason, and I think that there's more than a podcast. There's sort of books to be written about that and have been written about that. Yeah. But I think that in the past, the Whitehall and Westminster jealously guarded that role. And I think it's not just about Brussels, it goes to the heart of Westminster exceptionalism, and if it's exactly the same when you look at questions of UK devolution. Now, why a citizen sitting in I don't know, Stranraer or Hollywood or in Northern Ireland or in Scotland should feel more represented by somebody sitting in Westminster than they do by somebody sitting in Strasbourg or Brussels? I don't know, because there doesn't seem to me to be an enormous amount of difference, except that in the British system, while you do have nominally devolved government and you have nominally regional government or local government, you've also got this, to me, utterly iniquitous and sinful constituency MP system, where MPs in the national government, because they have this sort of regional role, seem to take it upon themselves to have also this sort of regional or this local governmental status and role. And people, national MPs should be dealing with national issues. So we come to, for example, the West Lothian question, which is something that's always really yanked my chain. The argument is that why should MPs in Scotland get a vote in Westminster on issues that are purely related to England? Because MPs in England don't get a vote on issues that are purely about Scotland, because that's done in the Scottish Parliament. To which I say, yeah, I know. We need an English devolved Parliament, or we need regional devolved parliaments. You need a much more structured and systematic way of devolving power in the United Kingdom. And instead you get this crazy system where you get the national tier weighing in on regional and local issues where they shouldn't be. And the reason they do that is because there's some sort of mystique about Westminster as being somehow more valid, more important, more valuable than any other tier of government, whether it's Brussels or Holyrood or the Senedd or Stormont or anything. That to me is a breakdown of our political culture, and that you don't see that in successful federal states. So if you look at Canada, or you look at Germany, people there have a strong sense of connection to their regional governments as well as to their national governments. And they get it. It's not difficult. There's nothing special about it. There's nothing particular. There's not a problem with UK citizens, which means that they can't understand these concepts. They're not concepts that are difficult. It's about our traditions and about what we're used to. But I mean, other countries have been used to things too and unlearn them. So there's no reason why we wouldn't be able to live in a federal system. The key thing here, above all, if I may say, is money. Is control of money. So if you look at Canada, for example, in Canada, you pay income tax to the province and you pay income tax to the federal state. Mm-hmm. And it's roughly about half and half. So about half, so provinces have revenue raising powers and have their own budgets and treasuries. And so does the federal government. In Britain, local authorities are entirely reliant upon national government for their money. In Scotland, it's somewhat different. But if you look at Brussels has revenue-raising capacity. It has its own resources, but it's minute compared to the national tier. And a lot of its money does come from the national tier. If you want meaningful devolution, if you want meaningful federalism, what you need to do is you need to give each tier of government its own resources, its own financial resources. And that breaks that, to me, toxic link or toxic hold that the national tier has over the citizen. Yeah, I don't know where I started on that rant, but
that's all right. And I definitely think you're right. There's this weird aberration where we seem to believe that the MPs seem to spend a ridiculous amount of time on constituency work. And I was reading this great book this year, Why We Get the Wrong Politicians, by Elizabeth Harding, I think her name is. Anyway, apologies if I've got that wrong, if you're listening. But one of the points she was making is that MPs spend so much time dealing with like local issues that really have nothing to do with what they're doing at Westminster, that they have so much less time to then actually deal with like what's going on and like the legislating they need to be doing at a national level. But I'm curious as to if you think that the reason that we would hold Westminster as like the power above all else, because of the way that our elections are split up. So, for example, in America is the only one that I can really like speak to effectively about their voting systems and whatnot, just because that's the one I'm best versed in outside of the UK. But they have the midterms, but then like you have like election day, voting day every 4 years. Or every 2 years in terms of the House and the midterms. But like that's, for us in the UK, we have like the Westminster elections, and that's the be all and end all. That's the 30 days of PERDA, and you've got the election rules, and you just have every single thing in the entire world geared towards, or everything in the media and our lives is just Westminster elections, Westminster elections, Westminster elections. You get almost 0% of that when we talk about like council elections or European elections. So like going like above and below like the power structures there. Do you think that's kind of contributory to the way that we see Westminster as like the be all and end all? Do you think it would be different if we say we had all our elections on the same day?
I don't think it's an issue of timing. I mean, without a doubt, you're right. I don't necessarily think it's an issue of timing. I think it's an issue of there is no simple answer to this. The reality is that in Britain, especially in England, I can't speak for Northern Ireland or Scotland, but I mean especially in England, every election is a proxy for the national election. So whether you're voting in a European election, a local election, or a general election, you're voting for you're essentially telling the government in Westminster what you think of them. It's broken at every level. The Westminster elections are broken because very few of us have meaningful votes at all, given the first past the post system. But then local elections and the European elections in the UK are broken too. The European elections were at least done by PR, but they were not treated as serious elections by the electorate. So you can ask yourself why, and I mean that's a question that would take every podcast under the sun to answer. But the reality is that the link between the elector, the voter, and what they're voting for is broken. So how do you fix that? I mean, it's sort of chicken and egg. It's in the way in which our press work, our media works, and the way it's also centralised and Westminster focused. It's in the way which we don't have proper local reporting, local media, and the way that other countries do. It's to do with the money issue that I was talking about the fact that local politicians can't make serious promises or build serious manifestos because they don't have the power to enact them, because they don't have the money to enact them. So at what point do you break this vicious circle? I don't know, but it needs to be broken. You need to have a better link between people, citizens, and their local representatives. I mean, when I look at other countries, again, when I look at Canada, for example, I see the connection that local people have between that they feel this connection to all sorts of different tiers of local government. It's the same in the States. You vote for your local school board, your local libraries, your local police, and these have meaningful consequences, and people are engaged, and people stand for election, and many more people are directly engaged in politics. And there isn't this stigma attached to local politics. It is seen as being of importance and value in its own right, and also as a stepping stone to a career in politics at a different level, maybe at the regional level, or the city level, or the national level, or European level. So all of that's broken in the English system, but also the British system. So how to fix that, I don't know, but it certainly needs to be fixed.
I mean, in America, there's definitely, but they have you've got your like state legislature, your state legislature. You've got like normally I think in every state you have like a House of Representatives and a Senate, and then you have your mayor, and you have the state governor, and then you have like your representatives for the state go into Congress in Washington and the Senate. So you like perhaps they're just more versed in the idea that you vote in for lots of different levels of government, and that matters. I mean, what I can say in Northern Ireland is that we definitely have like quite a connection to what's going on at Stormont. Even when it wasn't happening, everyone is very well versed in the parties, in the politics, in the policies that are getting passed. And it's perhaps like England really is lacking that because Westminster acts as both. So if you were to try and federalize the UK, then say you had like just a blank slate, or maybe you want to be realistic about it, whichever way you want to give the answer. But how would that look, and why do you think that would help renew that sense of democracy, or that sense of like connection to democracy that seems to have gone a little bit missing in politics in Britain?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'd start with the money. I think it all flows from the money. I think you start by giving local and regional authorities their own budgets and their own revenue raising capacities, and decoupling it from Westminster. So you take away Westminster's stranglehold on local and regional government, and to an extent that's happened in Scotland, and you can see the results of that. It needs to go further. But in England, we're not there at all. Quite the opposite. You're seeing, there's this lip service paid to devolution, but without devolution of finances, it's meaningless. It's meaningless. So that's where you start, to me. You then also, you need to have a codified, for me, I think you need to have a codified constitution. You need to have a codified basic law that sets out what is done at which level, and that sort of breaks the magic hold that Westminster has over UK politics. You also do symbolic things. You establish regional assemblies.
How many would you have for England, for example? Like, would you just have an English one? That's a detail.
No, I don't know. I think that that's a detail that I don't have a strong view on. I think probably not. You probably have regional assemblies, not just an English one. But you also do symbolic things, like you take Parliament, the Westminster Parliament, out of the Palace of Westminster, and you put it in a new modern building, and you give it a hemicycle instead of this oppositional sort of confrontational thing. And symbolic things like that I think that would be transformative, actually. But of course, that's where your small C conservatives would recoil in horror, because what are you doing to a mother of parliaments? Well, I mean, that's why you do it, because you need to break this awful obsession that we have with the past, and this sort of mythologizing that we have about our democracy, which is dysfunctional. It's deeply dysfunctional. Most of us don't have a vote. Most of us simply don't have a vote on people who govern us. So there you go. That's my pitch.
I mean, perhaps Theresa May's gifting of £1 billion to Northern Ireland was a nice little way of starting that process.
Well, I mean, as long as it's a gift, it doesn't mean anything. That's the point. It's a bribe. What you need is you need to be free of the patronage of Westminster. If Westminster can buy you off with a bung of £1 billion, you're not free. You're not. It's not meaningful power. If you can raise it yourselves, then it's meaningful. And the same is true at the European level. While the EU budget, okay, we have our own resources, but it's tiny compared to the kind of resources that a national government has. But also, the EU can't run a deficit. You can't borrow and pay it back. You have to spend all the money that you get every year, or it goes back to the member states. Again, that hobbles the EU as a meaningful tier of government. So I do think it all sort of goes back to the money.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think that's where you really need to make meaningful changes.
Yeah, well, I mean, follow the money. That was something I lived in Canada for a year, and I found when I went to fill out my taxes, that was a job. That was like 2 days of me like tearing my hair out. But then I got halfway through and realized that, hang on, this was only the state taxes I was filling out, and I had to do the federal ones as well.
Yeah, yeah, there are downsides, obviously. Yeah.
But there's one thing is that I've become perhaps hopelessly optimistic about, is that COVID and this entire sort of exercise in watching Parliament and governments deal with a serious crisis in the way that like we've never seen in our lifetime might give us some sort of impetus to consider reforming like what's going on. But and also actually to speak to your point about people like clinging to the past, I think that there's a great book that I'm still about halfway through. It's called Why Nations Fail, and the chapter I've just finished is sort of detailing why Britain emerged as one of the first like democracies. Or at least like the first parliament with any power, and then why we were the first country to undergo the Industrial Revolution. And reading it, you actually get like a real sense of like, wow, these people who were working back then in Parliament, and like whilst it was not a democracy, that they were pushing things that were considered like really out there at the time, and things that you just didn't see, like just like democratizing the economic and political sphere, and it makes you realize the extent to which our current crop of politicians, while they love to kind of fantasize and romanticize about Britain having been that first nation to be democratic, and you know we were the ones leading the world in everything, that we've lost that ability to break the mold essentially into like our previous successes mean that we like cling to them instead of looking to move forward and sort of engage in a little bit of creative destruction to revolutionize our democracy.
Yeah, you're right. What we're missing. We're missing radicalism, and I mean, I wouldn't say it's an exclusively British thing in terms of what led to modern liberal democracy. I mean, I had a discussion about this on the podcast recently with.
I was just going to say, it was just sort of detailing like Britain as an example of moving towards like a more democratized system.
Yeah, but I mean, I think what you're on to an important point here, which is that when you do look at other countries that function very well, or have modern democratic systems of government that are functioning well and can be seen to function well, often that has arisen out of complete chaos or carnage or destruction. So you've got the German state, which with its modern federal constitution, which is knocking it out of the park in all sorts of areas. Now that we know where that came from. God forbid we should have to go through something like that to be able to get a modern democracy. And we haven't had that kind of cleansing fire, if you like, in British politics, and which is why we are not match fit for the 21st century. And to be honest, I don't think COVID's going to deliver the hit that we need, but in combination with a few other things, maybe it will. And this is one of the reasons why I personally I'm a strong advocate as an Englishman and a European. I'm a strong advocate of Scottish independence. I think that would be a very good thing for Scotland, but also for the rest of the UK. Why? Because I think this Scottish brand of civic nationalism, which is inclusive and liberal and sees itself as part of a wider European mainstream, I think that's actually perfectly healthy and quite opposed to the kind of ethno-nationalism that we see in other places. So I think it would be a good thing for Scotland. Scotland as an independent member state of the EU would be like Ireland or Denmark, and I could see it doing extremely well. Not only that, the kind of shock that would deliver to the United Kingdom might be what we need to reform. Because, I mean, we would need some kind of serious kick up the arse to reform along the lines that I'm advocating. Otherwise, I just don't see it happening. In which case, you go further into decline and decay until ultimately you do get the kind of awful shock that. So, I think there is the potential for some far-reaching event that would be the trigger for these changes. But it's one of those cases of be careful what you wish for. You'd want it to happen in a manageable way. Yeah.
Well, there you go. You've just given yourself away as a Britain-hating European.
I'm really not. It really comes. I think the patriots are the people. What is patriotism ultimately? Is it attachment to institutions and to symbols? It really isn't. It's about wanting the best for your fellow citizens. And I genuinely, I'm somebody who has spent a lot of time, living in other countries and seeing how things are done elsewhere. And I do not believe that we are living the best lives that we could be living in the UK, in England here. Looking out of my window here in prosperous home counties, we are not living our best lives. When you look, let's take the example of America. We've all been following what's been going on in the States a lot over the last couple of weeks for obvious reasons. But one of the things that constantly shocks me is the way in which, on all sides of the American debate, you hear them saying that it's a straight choice between lockdown and economic prosperity. And people saying, if we lock down, people are going to go hungry. If we lock down, people will lose their jobs. Because there's no meaningful or serious discussion about government intervention to help those people. So you get people saying, well, we don't want to do what they've done in Germany, what Merkel has done, or what Johnson's done in the UK, and lock us all down and go into sort of economic decline. And you're thinking, are you looking at the same? Look at what's happening in Germany. People are getting, I don't know the precise figures, but they're getting, we're talking about 80% of salaries or something covered. And okay, this costs money, but the money comes from a prosperous state. It comes from having, high tax revenues, and you get high tax revenues because you've got successful businesses. It's a virtuous circle. If you've simply got billionaires taking private planes to go and sit in New Zealand, meanwhile while the rest of the country loses their jobs and gets COVID and dies, well, that's not going to help the country in the long run, is it? So I just wish that's America, but we have a similar problem here in the UK, which is that I think people just they lack the imagination to look and see how things are being done in similar countries. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier about, I wish that we would just simply grow up and face reality in the 21st century as a decent second-rate country. We don't have to be bloody global leaders, and the wit to be global leaders, in fact, simply means that we live worse lives than we should be or could be otherwise.
I mean, I feel like we probably have like an inflated sense of our place in the world but I don't think it's for the same reason that a lot of people would say. I don't think, like, obviously we have this kind of idea, is kind of similar to the American exceptionalism, is the British exceptionalism. It's like, we're different, we led the world, we were ruled like 2/3 of the globe. I honestly don't think that's it. Because I think honestly, the thing that inflates our egos more than anything as a country is when you look at where we are economically, like in terms of GDP compared to the rest of the world. We're sitting 5th or 6th. It kind of switches around between us and France. I'm not sure what the exact position is right now, but I think the thing that inflates our personal importance there is that so much of that GDP and so much of that capital and money that contributes to that figure is based around finance and the City of London, and that just massively blows out our sense of where we are in the world. Because if the money in, say, Germany or France is they may have similar sized economies, but the GDP, the general wealth of the average person is so much higher than in the UK. Like the money is concentrated in such like a small group of people. I mean, I say group, it's like it's more than just like 20 people in a room, but you get my point. And I think that kind of like gives us this sense that we're still doing really well compared to the rest of the world, that we're sitting like we're one of the best in the world because we got such a high GDP. And it's always talked about in terms of like Britain's economic success. But the levels of inequality kind of like speak to something completely different. And I honestly think that's where some of that inflated sense of ourselves has come from.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And you look at, there are maps that you can look up online which show the richest parts of Europe and the poorest parts of Europe broken down by region, and what they call the NUTS 3 region, which is the sort of the third category of regional delineation in Europe. And I think it's 9 out of the 10 poorest regions in Northern Europe are in the UK. Which is
two of the richest.
Absolute scandal. It's a disgrace. When we think about how rich we are as a country on paper, and what hurts me the most is that the people in those poorest regions don't seem to get it. They're the people they're the people in the red wall who went and voted Tory last time around, or they're the people who voted Leave because they thought that the EU was making them poorer. And they are the poorest people in Europe, or certainly in Northern Europe. And that shouldn't be. That shouldn't be when you look at what our GDP is, and it shouldn't be. And this is what really grinds my chains. Grinds my gears. We ought to be telling people that it can be better than this, and showing them examples. Look at the person doing your job in Belgium, in Flanders. Look at the person doing your job in the Rhineland. Look at what they can do. Okay, they're paying more tax than you are, but they can afford it because they're earning so much more than you, and they've got much more holiday time, and they've got much better facilities. They've got much better education. All of these things, I mean, they have a higher quality of life. But all you can focus on is symbols, or is your tax bill, or you're not looking at it holistically. You're not looking. And when our press make the comparison, they generally make the comparison with what people are doing in Australia or in America, which is so short-sighted. So we are also cursed, of course, by our language. I mean, that's a whole other issue.
Well, yeah, I know you anyway, Chris. I know you're a busy guy. So just to wrap up, is there anything you'd like to finish with, or plug, or anything? Well,
look, if anybody's coming to this, if you don't know me, I mean, I'd love a follow on Twitter where I'm called Autocrat, OTTOCRAT, Autocrat. Give me a follow on Twitter, and have a look at my blog, which is also Autocrat, but with a dot between the R and the AT, so autocrat.at. And then listen to the podcast, which I do with my friend Steve Bullock. It's called Cakewatch. You can find it on Apple or anywhere else. Just Cakewatch. Spell it the way that it sounds. As I say, we're not very, we're not being particularly productive at the moment, and we may not be particularly productive in the future. But there's a whole excellent back catalogue there for you to listen to if what I've been saying here strikes a chord at all. I'm just I've very much enjoyed being given a platform to rant at you. So thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Josh. I appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem, man. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast and to our mailing list. And don't forget, my book, Brexit, The Establishment Civil War, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. You'll find the link in the description below. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.